The lesson topic for this video is solving quadratic equations using undoing. Alright, so what we have in front of us here is an equation that is quadratic. Most of what we've seen with quadratics so far in this course has been in the form, what we call standard form. So y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. What we've been factoring in class. So y equals, let's say, 3x squared plus 2x minus 4. Now I'm just making something up here. I don't know if that's factorable. But either way, what we've been working on is standard form. Well, now we are going to shift and we're going to look at something that is in what we call vertex form. We'll talk more about that later. But we've got parentheses here with a squared, and we've got a number off to the side here and a 3 in the front. So if you see the parentheses that are squared, we're in vertex form. So this is, again, standard. Vertex form is going to be y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. All right, and again, this is an example of that right here. So we still have that a value out in the front, and we've got an x here. Subtract 8, for example, squared plus another value off to the side. So more on how we use that later, but for right now what we're going to do is we're going to remind ourselves that we already kind of know how to solve equations with this kind of format just from what we've learned in the past. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to find y, we're going to find y when we know what the value of x is. Well, we know that if we have a value of x, 3, we can plug that in and we can simplify to find y. So I'm going to start by writing y equals 3 times the quantity x, which is 3, we're going to put that in, minus 8 squared plus 2. Now, remember, this is important for what we are talking about with undoing. We know PEMDAS, or the order of operations. When we simplify, we go down the order of operations. When we simplify, sorry about that, when we simplify, we do parentheses, then exponents, then we multiply, divide, and add and subtract. So what we're doing right here is we're simplifying this right-hand side of the equation, okay? Because we've got the y alone over here. So we're going to simplify parentheses first. So 3 times 3 minus 8 is negative 5 squared plus 2. Then we're going to use our exponent next, and our exponent is negative 5 squared, so we've got y equals 3 times negative 5 squared. Be careful. Even your calculator will kind of tell you the wrong answer if you're not careful with parentheses here. Negative 5 squared means negative 5 times negative 5, which is positive 25. We got plus 2 there. And then we multiply or divide from left to right, and then after that we'll add or subtract. So we're going to multiply 3 times 25 next, which is 75. And then 75 plus 2 is 77. So again, we took the 3, we put it in, substituted in for the x, and we solve for y. All right, so good news on this. You will not be required in our class to do this, okay? You will need to find the value of y when you know x, but this was a skill that we've practiced many times for many years of math, order of operations, and we are going to give you kind of a break on this, and here is how. Okay, you can do this by just using trace. And yes, even on the test. That's what we want you to do. We don't want you to take the time to compute this using the order of operations by hand. We've done that a lot. You have shown proficiency on that. We don't need to keep practicing it. So let's remind ourselves how to use our graphing calculator. I'm going to use GC here for graphing calculator to find the value of y when we know the value of x. Again, it's simple. You're going to go to your y1 on your calculator. You're going to put this right here in, so just 3 times x minus 8. You're not putting a number in for x. Remember that. You are not putting a number in for x when you type the equation into your graphing calculator. So you do this right here, type that in, then you're going to graph it, or draw, depending on which calculator you have. And then you're simply going to hit trace, which is either F1 or the trace key, depending again on your calculator, and then type in this case, -1. And you're going to find your answer when you do this, and in this case, it's y equals 245. So that's the answer for this one, and that's all you need to do. Type it in your calculator, use trace, and find your answer. Why don't you go ahead and just do that for this one here to make sure you are good to go. Okay, so if you did that one, you should have got y equals 194. Again, using your graphing calculator to find y when you know what x is. On the next screen, we're going to talk about how to find x when we know what y is, and we are not going to just use our calculator for that process. Alright, so we still have the same equation, y equals 3 times the quantity x minus 8 squared plus 2. But now we're going to find x. We're going to find the value of x when we know what y is. So this is the type that when we know what y is, we have to show our work, and we cannot just rely on our calculator. You can use your calculator to check your answer, and that would be a great plan, but for right now I want you to remember that we need to plug that 11 in for y, and then we are going to solve. So 11 equals 3 times x minus 8 squared plus 2. Remember on the previous screen I said we have to think back to PEMDAS. Remember that when we use the order of operations this way, we are simplifying. But when we solve an equation, when we're solving an equation, we need to do the opposite of PEMDAS. Okay, so simplifying is just on one side of the equal sign, and you're just simplifying that side. Solving means we need to get the variable x alone, and it is with a whole bunch of other things on the same side. So when we solve, and this is why the lesson topic is called solving by undoing, we are going to undo the PEMDAS steps. Undo. So we are going to start with addition and subtraction when we are solving this equation right here. So if you look, here's my variable x that I want to get alone. Well, this minus 8 right here, you might think that's the first thing we deal with addition or subtraction, but it's not, since it's stuck in the parentheses, which means it will be last. The last thing you're going to do is deal with that minus 8. Then it's squared, that's second to last. It's being multiplied by 3, that's here. So adding and subtracting, the first thing we need to deal with is this plus 2 right here. So how do we undo something that has 2 being added? Well, we subtract it. Remember that if we subtract a number from one side of the equal sign, we need to subtract it from the other side. So 11 minus 2 is 9 equals 3 times x minus 8 squared, and these cancel. All right, so next, after we did our addition and subtraction, we have to multiply or divide because we're undoing the PEMDAS steps. So we have to get rid of this 3. Now you guys, very important, we are not going to distribute the 3. We cannot do that because the squared would have to come first. So if you want to multiply x minus 8 times itself, which means you need to FOIL it, and then multiply the 3 in, you could give it a try, but that is not the process that we want to use. So we're not distributing it, and we're not ever going to distribute squared like this. That doesn't work, actually. So what we need to do is we need to divide both sides by 3. We're going to divide this side by 3, which means we need to divide this side by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. These 3's cancel each other out. They make 1. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So now we have 1 times x minus 8 in parentheses squared. All right. So after we multiply or divide, we know that our next thing to do is our exponent. So here's the next question. How do we undo a squared? Do you remember? We square root. That is the opposite of squaring. We square root, which means we have to square root both sides of the equal sign. Okay? Just to make sure you kind of understand why we need to square root. If I have a number x squared, let's say it's 5 squared, so we have 5 squared, which we know is 25, right? Well, if I square root this, well, that means I'm square rooting 25. Well, what's the square root of 25? Well, that would be 5, which is back to this number here, because the square root and the square cancel each other out. Now, if that didn't make a ton of sense to you, we can talk more about that in class, but I want to kind of explain why this works. So we can now cancel out the square root and the square. They cancel each other out. They're opposite operations. Now here is a huge thing you need to remember. When we square root both sides of an equation, we need to include a plus or minus when we find the square root of that value, in this case 3. Okay, by the way, the square root of 3, we're going to use our calculators for this, so they're again necessary here. It is 1.732. We're going to round all decimals to the third place, which is the thousandths place, every single time, 3 places. We'll talk more in just a second about why we need that plus or minus there. And that will equal, again, the canceling of the square root and the square, they're gone, so we just have x minus 8 here. Okay? So why did we need this plus or minus? That's kind of an, that's kind of an important thing to understand, why we need this plus or minus. Okay, so I'm just going to go off to the side over here again. So if you think about what squared means is something times itself, right? Something times itself is something squared. So let's just use 4 times 4. Okay, something times itself. So that's 4 squared, right? And we know that that's 16. But what about, so let me change that to 16, right? So then we know that the square root of 16 can bring us back to 4. But what is negative 4 times negative 4? Well, negative 4 times negative 4 is 16, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And if I square root 16, well, I had just said that the square root of 16 is 4, but that wasn't what I started with. It was negative 4. So the square root of 16 could also have been arrived at by saying negative 4 times negative 4. Or I should say that 16 could have been arrived at by doing negative 4 times negative 4. So since 2 different options give us this 16, we need the 2 options right here. So 4 times 4 is 16, and negative 4 times negative 4 is also 16. So we need both options. We have to have plus or minus. It is absolutely required that we have that. So super important to remember, maybe even put a little star here and say we need to have the plus or minus every single time. Now, how do we continue solving this? Well, last but not least, right, we have to deal with our parentheses. This used to be in parentheses, so now we're going to add or subtract to get rid of that at the end. So we're going to add 8. Now look what this does here. We need to do positive or negative 1.732 plus 8. Over here, these are going to cancel. We're going to have x left. How I recommend that you kind of rewrite this is be very careful. I'm going to rewrite it with starting with the x here. Okay, so x equals a positive 1.732 plus 8, or x equals negative 1.732 plus 8. One of the main mistakes people make is they think it's plus 8 and minus 8. It is not. It's always plus 8. Look at that. It's plus 8. This is where the plus or minus is. So a positive 1.732 plus the 8, or a negative 1.732 plus the 8. So we need to compute both of these, and they are both our answers. So the first one will be 9.732, and the other one will be 6.268. All right, that should be a 6. Sorry, it's a little messy. All right, so here are 2 answers for this problem. X is equal to, we didn't need all that work there to circle here, but these are our answers right here. 9.732 or 6.268. Again, when we put 11 in for y, there will be 2 different answers that will work. Now, if you put this in right here for x, subtracted 8, squared it, multiplied by 3, and added 2, you're going to get 11. And you can check that right now. If you put 6.268 in for x, subtract 8, square it, multiply by 3, and add 2, you are going to get 11. I'd like you to try this one on your own using these steps. I know it's the first time through it, but see what you can do. I will post the answers in just a couple seconds. All right, so I will look to see on your notes that I hope you have work for this, showing all these steps to arrive at our 2 possible answers to solve for x when we know y.